Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Shodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tiravanachari Tiravanachari Yamuna Tiravanachari Tiravanachari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Bihari Jaya Mr. Pad Paramahamsa Purudikacharya Ashtotar to the Srimad Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Purudikacharya Ashtotar to the Srimad Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glory to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Okay. Is there anyone else? Oh, there they are. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. On this 26th day of October 2022 in San Diego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And we are beginning a new chapter tonight, chapter 8, entitled Attaining the Supreme, which you will find on page 345. Nope, you got the one book, it's not page 345, right? What's the page number? 315. Yeah, because you have the special book with the different page numbers. You can always tell by the margins. See how thin they are? The margins. You see what a margin is? A margin is the space. Anyway, you're okay. You got the verse. Okay. Arjuna Vacha Kim Tad Brahma Kim Adhyātmam Kim Karma Purushottama Adibhutam Chakim Proktam Adidaivam Kim Uchyate. Arjuna Vacha King Tad Brahma Kim Adhyātmam King Karma Purushottama Adibhutang Chakim Proktam Adidaivam Kim Uchyate. Arjuna Vacha King Tad Brahma Kim Adhyātmam Kim Karma Purushottama Adibhutang Chakim Proktam Adidaivam Kim Uchyate. Arjuna Vacha King Tad Brahma Kim Adhyātmam King Karma Purushottama Adibhutang Chakim Proktam Adidaivam Kim Uchyate. Go ahead, Dharma. Arjuna Vacha King Tad Brahma Kim Adhyātmam King Karma Purushottama Adibhutam Chakim Proktam Adidaivam Kim Uchyate. Want to try it, Paul?
Sure. Arjuna Uvacha
Arjuna Vacha
Kim Tad Brahma Kim Adhyātmam
King Tad Brahma Kim Adhyātmam
Kim Karma Purushottama
King Karma Purushottama
Adibhutam Ka Kim Proktam
Adibhutam Chakim Proktam
Adidaivam Kim Uchyate
Adidaivam Kim Uchyate. Yeah, Dan, you want to try? Arjuna Uvacha King Tad Brahma Kim Adhyātmam King Karma Purushottama Adibhutam Chakim Proktam Adidaivam Kim Uchyate. Okay. Word by words?
I can try, Prabhu.
Oh, please. Tapas.
Arjuna Uvacha
Arjuna Vacha
Kim Tad Brahma Kim Adhyātmam
Kim Tad Brahma Kim Adhyātmam
Kim Karma Purushottama
Kim Karma Purushottama
Adibhutam Chakim Proktam
Adibhutam Chakim Proktam
Adidaivam Kim Uchyate.
Adidaivam Kim Uchyate. Page 345. Beginning of chapter 8. Word by word meanings. Arjuna Uvacha. Arjun said, Kim, what? Tat, that. Brahma, Brahman. Kim, what? Adhyātmam, the self. Kim, what? Karma, fruit of activities. Purusha Uttama, O Supreme Person. Adibhutam, the material manifestation. Cha, and. Kim, what? Proktam is called. Adidaivam, the demigods. Kim, what? Uchyate is called. Arjuna inquired, O my Lord, O Supreme Person, what is Brahman? What is the self? What are fruit of activities? What is this material manifestation? And what are the demigods? Please explain this to me. Purport. In this chapter, Lord Krishna answers different questions from Arjuna, beginning with, what is Brahman? The Lord also explains karma, fruit of activities, devotional service, and yoga principles, and devotional service in its pure form. The Srimad Bhagavatam explains that the Supreme Absolute Truth is known as Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. In addition, the living entity, the individual soul, is also called Brahman. Arjuna also inquires about Atma, which refers to body, soul, and mind. According to the Vedic dictionary, Atma refers to the mind, soul, body, and the senses also. Arjuna has addressed the Supreme Lord as Purushottama, the Supreme Person, which means that he, Arjuna, was putting these questions not simply to a friend, but to the Supreme Person, knowing him to be the supreme authority, able to give definitive answers. Om Jnana Timarandasya Jnanandana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmilitam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisances unto him and all members of Sri Parampara. So, this verse is related to the previous verse, which is the last verse of the 7th chapter, in which Krishna says, those in full consciousness of me, who know me, the Supreme Lord, to be the governing principle of the material manifestation of the demigods and all methods of sacrifice, can understand and know me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, even at the time of death. And if you look carefully, you'll see that each one of these questions, these entities that Arjuna wanted Krishna to explain, is mentioned in this last verse. Adibhuta, Adidaiva, Adiyagya, I'm sorry, and also text 29. Te Brahma, Tadvadu, there's the Brahma, and there's the Atman, Adhyātman, and there's the Karma. All of these subjects that Arjuna asked about are in the last two verses, which Krishna says you will understand fully if you're a pure devotee. So Arjuna wants Krishna to explain them now. And it's one of the first one is Brahman, which is important to understand. As I mentioned last night, one of the first things you learn in the temple, Aham Brahmasmi, I'm spirit, I'm Brahman, I'm not this material body. And understanding and living according to that understanding, that the body is simply a complicated suit of clothes. Krishna says in the 2nd chapter, Vasangsi jirnani yata vihaya nabani gurnati naro parani tata sharirani vihaya jirnani yanyani sanati nabani dehi. That just as one takes off, discards an old set of clothes or maybe gives it to the Goodwill store, you know, and then before that he does that, he gets a new set, and so you have a new set of clothes. Similarly, when the body is worn out, you discard it just like an old set of clothes, and you get a new set of bodies, a new body with new senses and everything like that. So that's the Atma, and what is activity, what is Brahman, what is Adibhuta, Adidaiva, and Adhyātma. And this Adiyagya, the principle of sacrifice, that is also mentioned in the 2nd chapter. So we can continue with that list. These two go together, these two verses. Adiyagya katam kotra. Let's try that one again. It's text 2. Adiyagya katam kotra. Dehismin madhusudana. Priyanakale chakatam. Gyeyosi niyatatma bihi. Who is the Lord of sacrifice, and how does he live in the body, O Madhusudan? And how can those engaged in devotional service know you at the time of death? Purport. Lord of sacrifice may refer either to Indra or Vishnu. Vishnu is the chief of the primal demigods, including Brahma and Shiva. He's not a demigod himself. He's the lord of the other demigods. And Indra is the chief of the administrative demigods. Both Indra and Vishnu are worshipped by yajna performances. But here Arjuna asks who is actually the Lord of yajna, sacrifice, and how the Lord is residing within the body of the living entity. Arjuna addresses the Lord as Madhusudana, because Krishna once killed a demon named Madhu. Actually, these questions, which are of the nature of doubts, should not have arisen in the mind of Arjuna, because Arjuna is a Krishna-conscious devotee. Therefore, these doubts are like demons. Since Krishna is so expert in killing demons, Arjuna here addresses him as Madhusudana, so that Krishna might kill the demonic doubts that arise in Arjuna's mind. Now, The word priyanakale in this verse is very significant because whatever we do in life will be tested at the time of death. Priyanakale means the time of death. Arjuna is very anxious to know of those who are constantly engaged in Krishna consciousness. What should be their position at that final moment? At the time of death, all the bodily functions are disrupted, and the mind is not in a proper condition. Thus disturbed by the bodily situation, one may not be able to remember the Supreme Lord. Maharaj Kulashekar, a great devotee, prays, "My dear Lord, just now I am quite healthy, and it is better that I die immediately so that the swan of my mind can seek entrance at the stem of your lotus feet." The metaphor is used because the swan, a bird of the water, takes pleasure in digging into the lotus flowers. Its sporting proclivity is to enter the lotus flower. Maharaj Kulashekar says to the Lord, "Now my mind is undisturbed and I am quite healthy. If I die immediately thinking of your lotus feet, then I am sure that my performance of your devotional service will become perfect. But if I have to wait for my natural death, then I do not know what will happen. Because at that time the bodily functions will be disrupted, my throat will be choked up, and I do not know whether I shall be able to chant your name. Better let me die immediately." Arjuna questions how a person can fix his mind on Krishna's lotus feet at such a time. Om jnanatimirandasya jnanandana shalakaya chakshu unmidatam mena tasmai shri gurave namaha. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisance to him and all members of Sri Parampara, the disciplic succession. So these two verses comprise the introduction to the chapter. And these elements will be explained, and especially important text 4, 5, and 6, in which he answers the question, how can one know you at the time of death, and what happens if one remembers you at the time of death. So these very key verses coming up. And here Arjuna is setting the stage, and we're going to learn some of the truth of some of these very important subject matters that Arjuna is asked about. First, in order, Krishna answers them in order. And this is part of our process of being inquisitive about the absolute truth. There are all these technical terms that we find often they refer to things that are very common to us. Just like this adi yagya, adhyātma, adi daiva. So, adi bhautik, adhyātma, adi daivik. You may have heard of this term of the threefold miseries. You remember what they are? Anyone? You know what they are, Dharma. The threefold misery. No, the birth, old age, disease, and death are in their own category. But these are there's some overlap. But adi daivik miseries, for instance, when you read about the big hurricane that devastated part of Florida recently, or now we have a mega drought, which is all over the place, including right here, and earthquakes and all these are called adi daivik klesha. These are things that cause you misery, and you can't do anything. It's caused by higher powers. It's the demigods acting. There's adhyātmic miseries, where everything is fine, weather is perfect here in San Diego. There's no drought, obviously, but you're miserable because your own mind is giving you trouble, or your own body is giving you trouble. You know, so many pains has come. And then there's adi bhautik, which is other living beings, human beings. I remember I always like to refer to this. I read this many, many years ago. I used to investigate different philosophies back in the 60s. Existentialism was very popular. And I remember this, I think Jean Paul Sartre, I think he had a play that he had written called No Exit. I don't remember anything from the play except one line. And the protagonist, the hero, was saying, "Hell is other people." A very miserable man, you know. He was a misogynist or whatever. But oftentimes you find yourself where you're being tormented by other people. Or, Prabhupada gives the example of bed bugs. He maybe have experienced them in Vrindavan or somewhere, every sleeping. So we've all experienced this. You know, somebody or some things, some of the living beings are causing you problems. Certainly we have our own problems, the body is giving us trouble. You can see how the overlap is there. You say, oh, we have this mega drought and we have these more powerful hurricanes. Yeah, but the scientists tell us that it's gotten worse because of all of the greenhouse gases that we're pumping into the air. So is it adibautic misery or is it adidaivic misery? Welcome, Hare Krishna. Darshan will be at 8:15. Hare Krishna. 8:15, yeah. There's a little of both. It's adibautic because millions and millions of people, including ourselves, we're pouring out these greenhouse gases and it's changing the climate, and therefore the drought is coming and this is coming. So what, you could say, well, is it adidaivic? Well, it's a little of both. So these terms are going to be defined here. If you notice, all of them come in, adibautic, adhyātmic, adidaivic, and others. So let's investigate how Krishna explains these now, all these terms. And actually his last question, or last topic that he wanted to explain, priyana kale chikatam gehosi niyatapnabi. How can one know you at the time of death? This is the all-important question. Understanding what Brahman is and what adhyātma is, it doesn't really help you unless it gives you information and understanding of how you can know Krishna at the time of death. That's what everything is leading toward. Right at the beginning of the second canto, there's a nice little summary of the instructions. There's several, complete lessons within the Bhagavatam. I've always noticed that. The second chapter of the first canto, beginning with text 6, talking about Dharma. The question was, what is real Dharma? Is a key question for human beings who want to be human beings. Otherwise, you sink down to the animal level. So the sages at Naimisharanya, they asked Sutta Goswami, what is that Dharma by which the soul can be completely satisfied? Because that's, after all, what we're all after, permanently satisfied. So he has a series of 16 verses that give a whole lesson in Krishna, in what is the Dharma? Dharma is that activity that engenders pure devotional service. And he goes on to explain the result of that and so forth. So it's a complete lesson. And Prabhupada would give many lectures on these verses. And I had an idea back in, 1990, to make a book out of this. Just like we have the Science of Self-Realization book, we have the teachings of Lord Kapila, we have the teachings of Lord Kunti, of Queen Kunti, excuse me. And so I did. I took selections, the verses and the purports and the translations, and plus selections from Prabhupada's lectures on those. And we have a book that's called Dharma, the Way of Transcendence. I think they have some on this little carousel we have outside. So this is also a little, even a shorter but very essential instruction, Shukadeva Goswami to Maharaj Parikshit at the beginning of the second canto, chapter 1. And Maharaj Parikshit had asked a very critical question at the end of the first canto. Don't forget, it's very, very urgent for him. He's only got 7 days. He has no time to waste, And he's sat down by the bank of the Ganges, and all these great sages come, and people come from outer space, the Munis from higher planets, and they're waiting. And then Shukadeva Goswami comes, and he sits down on the asana. He's the speaker. And so the first question is, what should one think about? What should one hear a chant as death approaches? Because this is coming for him, but it's coming for us too. This is a question for us. So first thing, he praises the question. Vadhyanishate prashna kuto loka hitang nipa atmavit sabatak pungsam shotavyadashaya. I forget the last word. So he says, very nice question. Vadhyanishate prashna. This question and its answer are beneficial for the hearer and the speaker and those who listen to the answer. And then he starts contrasting that with ordinary questions and answers. Shrotavyadi nirajanya ninang santi sahasrata apashyatam atmatattvam griheshu grihamedinam. It says, for those who are simply materialistic, there are millions, he says thousands, but we know with the internet it's millions, that there are millions of subject matters for hearing, which don't help them. Rather, they contaminate your mind. And then he describes what are the characteristics. In a few verses he describes what it means to be ordinarily materialistic consciousness. He says, Nidreha hriyate naktam vivachena dabhavayak divat chartihiya rajan kutumba baranenava. At night time, such materialistic persons, they waste their time in sleeping. Hare Krishna. Thanks for coming. Hari Bol. Since they weren't going to hear the whole explanation, I couldn't leave it. They waste their time in sleeping or sex life. And during the day, they make money, and on the weekend they go shopping. What's the word for shopping in Sanskrit? Kutumba baranenava. In order to maintain the family, you got to go shopping. You know? So then, and everyone knows that you have to have a defense system, right? I mean, it begins with health insurance, you know, and keep the body. The body is the first line of defense. Deha patta kalatra adhyātma sainishvasatsapi tesham bhamato nidanam pasyanapina pasyati. It says these materially attached gross householders, they have various soldiers to protect them. First is a healthy body, strong body. You know, making sure you're taking all the supplements, you're working out, you know, health insurance. And then your children, relatives, your family, extended family, apatya, kalatru, beginning with the wife, adishu, atmasainyeshu. These are the soldiers that will protect myself, you know. But there are satsu, they're fallible, these fallible soldiers. In other words, you're taking shelter and hoping for protection of things that ultimately will fail you. Whether it's the body or your bank account or whatever it is. You can't. But in illusion, you take shelter. Tesham pramatto. You know what matta means? Mad. Then who can say what pramatta means? Exactly. Nidanam pasyan. You've seen in history that these people, you know, people have died, and you know, all of these have failed. You live in the world for a while, and you see that they're. But still, because you're mad, you still take shelter. Nidanam pasyanapina pasyati. This phrase comes up several times in the Bhagavad Gita. Although seeing, you don't see. Just like Krishna says, hardly anyone understood that I was God when I was on the planet. They see, but they don't understand that this is the Lord. You see, this is the motto for material life, material vision. You're seeing with your eyes, but you're not understanding what's going on. So then he says, "Pasyanapina pasyati." So then he gives like a key verse. I think this is where he says the key verse. Tasmat. Then he comes with therefore. Therefore what? If you want to be fearless at the time of death, ichito ichita bhayam, you want fearlessness, then here's what you have to do. Tasmad bharata sarvatma bhagavan ishvaro hari shrotavyak kirtitavyascha smartavyak chechitabayam. Ichitabayam means desiring fearlessness. If you want to be fearless at the time of death, and it's very pertinent for Maharaj Purgit, it's coming up, you know, in a few days. And for us too, it may be even less than a few days, who knows. So this is the formula. Bharata is the exalted descendant of King Bharat. Then he gives 4 definitions of God. Sarvatma, the Supreme Soul, Super Soul. Bhagavan, Supreme Personality of God. Ishvara, the Supreme Controller. And Hari, he who takes away all of your misery and gives you bliss. What should you do? Shrotavyak, hear about him. Kirtitavyakta, chant about him. Smartatavya, and thus remember. Hearing, chanting, and remembering about Krishna, which are the first 3 processes of devotional service. What is that? Shavanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, etc. And then what is the result? Then he gives a verse that it begins with the word etavan. Now I noticed as I studied the Bhagavatam that oftentimes key verses will begin with this word, etavan. So this is the first one that in the Bhagavatam that begins with that word. Etavad sankhya yoga abhyam swadharma parinishtaya janma labak parak pungsam ante narayana smritihi. Does that last line sound familiar to anybody? Anyway, you remember this. Ante narayana smritihi. Remembering Narayan at the end of life. This is what we're reading about in the morning, where Jamil, for all his failings and sins, he remembered Narayan at the end of life. It may have been his son, but he called out the name, and the real Narayan, sent his representatives to save him from being dragged off to hell. How important it is to remember Narayan at the end of life. And who is the Supreme Narayan? Krishna. This is testified by Lord Brahma. So that's the whole show in a nutshell. You know, if you these Kali Yugites, you know, are we really going to be able to read the whole Bhagavatam? You know, 18,000 verses? Maybe not. Therefore, in the second chapter of the whole book, he gives a summary of this philosophy. If you only get to that second chapter and you really absorb the lessons, you'll be fine. And here, the second canto, after 19 chapters of the first canto, the second canto, right at the beginning, he gives instruction, and you'll find lessons like that. There's Kapila Dev has these called the Sadhu Sangashtaka. At the beginning of his instructions to his mother, beginning in 25th chapter, third canto. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but it's all in terms of association. Your whole consciousness is by association. So he said the importance of associating with pure devotees, and then the result of that is Satam Prasanga. So Krishna is going to give us a little lesson here in a few verses. That is, if we could just follow these three instructions, we'll be okay. So now Krishna is going to start explaining what these are. What Brahman is, what the self is, adhyātma, and so forth. Okay, if there's no questions, we'll go on. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Aksharam Brahma Paramam Svabhavo Adhyātma Muchyate Bhuta Bhavo Bhavakaro Visarga Karma Sangitaha. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, the indestructible, transcendental living entity is called Brahman, and his eternal nature is called adhyātma, the self. Action pertaining to the development of the material bodies of the living entities is called karma, or fruitive activities. Now before we go forward, notice that karma produces material bodies. So we want to end our karma. Not that we don't want to do nothing, but we want to enter the state of naishkarmya. Means working, but there's no result, because whatever you do for the pleasure of Krishna. It's all sublimated. You're not making any new karma, and you're getting rid of all your old karma. And when the body finally falls, back to Godhead. Purport: Brahman is indestructible and eternally existing, and his constitution is not changed at any time. But beyond Brahman, there is Para-Brahman. Brahman refers to the living entity, and Para-Brahman refers to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The constitutional position of the living entity is different from the position he takes in the material world. In material consciousness, his nature is to try to be the Lord of matter. But in spiritual consciousness, Krishna consciousness, his position is to serve the Supreme. When the living entity is in material consciousness, he has to take on various bodies in the material world. That is called karma, or varied creation by the force of material consciousness. In Vedic literature, the living entity is called Jivatma and Brahman, but he is never called Para-Brahman. The living entity, or Jivatma, takes different positions. Sometimes he merges into the dark material nature and identifies himself with matter, and sometimes he identifies himself with the superior spiritual nature. Therefore, he is called the Supreme Lord's marginal energy. According to his identification with material or spiritual nature, he receives a material or spiritual body. In material nature, he may take a body from any of the 8,400,000 species of life. But in spiritual nature, he has only one body. In material nature, he is manifested sometimes as a man, demigod, animal, beast, bird, etc., according to his karma. To attain material heavenly planets and enjoy their facilities, he sometimes performs sacrifices or yajna, but when his merit is exhausted, he returns to earth again in the form of a man. This process is called karma. The Chandogya Upanishad describes the Vedic sacrificial process. On the sacrificial altar, 5 kinds of offerings are made into 5 kinds of fire. The 5 kinds of fire are conceived of as the heavenly planets, the clouds, the earth, man, and woman. And the 5 kinds of sacrificial offerings are faith, the enjoyer on the moon, rain, grains, and semen. In the process of sacrifice, the living entity makes specific sacrifices to attain specific heavenly planets and consequently reaches them. When the merit of sacrifice is exhausted, the living entity descends to earth in the form of rain, then takes on the form of grains, and the grains are eaten by a man and transformed into semen, which impregnates a woman, and thus the living entity once again attains the human form to perform sacrifice, and so repeat the same cycle. In this way, the living entity perpetually comes and goes on the material path. The Krishna-conscious person, however, avoids such sacrifices. He takes directly to Krishna consciousness and thereby prepares himself to return to Godhead. So what sacrifice does it perform in this age, Dharma?
Harinam.
Yes, Harinam Sankirtan, Sankirtan Jagya. Impersonalist commentators on the Bhagavad Gita unreasonably assume that Brahman takes the form of Jiva in the material world. And to substantiate this, they refer to chapter 15, verse 7 of the Gita. But in this verse, the Lord also speaks of the living entity as an eternal fragment of myself. The fragment of God, the living entity, may fall down into the material world, but the Supreme Lord, Achyuta, never falls down. Achyuta means one who never falls. Therefore, this assumption that the Supreme Brahman assumes the form of Jiva is not acceptable. It is important to remember that in Vedic literature, Brahman, the living entity, is distinguished from Para-Brahman, the Supreme Lord. So there's a lot to digest there. Now, Prabhupada mentions here about how we've come into this material world, didn't he? Yeah. Yeah, no, not that, but for when we first come in. Brahman refers to living entity. The constitutional position of living entity is from the beginning of the Part-1. It's different from the position he takes in the material world. In the material consciousness, he's trying to be the Lord of matter, but in spiritual consciousness, his position is to serve the Supreme. So, if you recall, going back to near the end of the previous chapter, we find in verse 27, Ichcha Dvesha Samutena. You may recall that Prabhupada, I mentioned how Prabhupada would use this verse to explain how we originally fell into the material world, which is a perennial question that comes up naturally. How did we get here? You know, if it's so blissful up there, why would we leave? So this Ichcha Dvesha Samutena Dvandva Mohena Bharata. The Ichcha and Dvesha. Ichcha refers to desire, and Dvesha refers to hate or abhorrence. So in the spiritual world, somehow or other, we came to desire to exploit material nature, to enjoy in Krishna's position. And thus we hated the idea of serving him. So those two things leads to Dvandva Moha, which means the bewilderment of duality. There's no duality in the material world. Everything is absolute. Everything is good. Everything reminds you of Krishna. It's an expression of Krishna's internal energy. But in this world, there is duality. There's heat and cold, pleasure and pain, all of these different things. But it's moha. And ultimately, it's all simply Krishna's energy, but we don't see it as that because we've forgotten the Lord. We've forgotten Krishna. It's connection to Krishna. That's our disease. So, sarva bhutani samoham, all living entities here in the material world, thus bewildered, enter into this world. Sarga yanti. Sarga is a word for creation, this created world. We're on page 348, actually. We were just reviewing 339. So, now when we go to the text 4 that we studied, he's starting to explain what all of these different elements are. And Prabhupada is talking about, what was it, text 3? Which one did we just finish? Yeah, we did text 3, right? Yeah. And Brahman, beyond Brahman is Para-Brahman. So we've lost our constitutional position. This is the point. Is that we have this called the Swarup Siddhi. The Swarup Siddhi means your perfect form. You remember Prabhupada talks about we all have our spiritual form. But it's covered. We have no access to it right now. But Krishna consciousness is a process of systematically rediscovering that spiritual form that we have and acting on the spiritual platform. The nature of the spiritual form probably refers to 15th chapter, text 7. Mamai Vangso Jiva Loka Jiva Bhuta Sanatana, that all of the living entities here are my parts and parcels. Mama Eva Angsha. Angsha means a little particle, just like a drop of water in the ocean. It has the same qualities. It's also salty. The sun ray has a little bit of heat, a little bit of light, compared to the infinite heat and light of the sun. So we have Krishna's qualities, but in minute degree. And those qualities those spiritual qualities can be covered over when we detach ourselves from Krishna. Prabhupada often gives this analogy from the Shastra. You're blazing fire and you see so many sparks, and they're fiery sparks in the fire. But if they get thrown out of the fire, like if you'd have experienced a fireplace, there's this stones in front, and a little spark will come out, and it becomes an ember, it's glowing, and then it dies, right? It stops glowing. So we're like little particles of spirit, but because we've alienated ourselves from Krishna, we don't show our spiritual nature. And we are sometimes miserable, the world of duality, heat and cold, pleasure, pain. So that's the situation we find ourselves. And so this, we want to try to regain our spiritual nature, and that can come again through association, proper association. Going back just to the sadhu sangha, he talks about this prasangam. Sangha, we know, is sadhu sangha, right? Pra is a intensifier. So prasangam means intense association, but it also means intense attachment, because sangha can mean attachment. Remember those verses from the second chapter? Here we are in the material world, dhyāyado vishayan pungsa, when living entity becomes absorbed in thinking of the object of the senses. Forget all about anything spiritual, and this is the object of the sense, something really I want. Dhyāyado vishayan pungsa, sangha, you develop attachment. Sangas-teshu bhajayate. Sangat sanjayate kama. And if that sangha goes on, then it develops into a strong desire to enjoy. But you can never be fully satisfied, because you're looking for ultimately this infinite enjoyment of the spiritual world, but it's not available on the material plane. So your karma is frustrated. Then what comes up if you can't enjoy it? Anger. Kama, krodho bijayate. And from too much anger, you become completely bewildered. You can change your whole nature. You can kill you. Prabhupada talks about how one brother killed another brother. And the first brother was arrested, convicted. He was going to be hanged. And this is in India. And this is a real story. And the father went to the judge and pleaded, one of my sons is already dead, and the other one you're going to kill. Just give him a life sentence or something, And so he gave him a life sentence. But the poor guy, he's probably to regret that the rest of his life. But the karma covers your knowledge. This is part in the third chapter. And you do things you would never do before. So this is the degradation from meditating on the objects of the senses. That's why we're enjoined to stay aloof from the object of the senses, or see those objects not as something I can enjoy, but if appropriate, if possible, engage them in Krishna's service. And that way you start enjoying with real enjoyment for the soul, which is the enjoyment of reciprocating with Krishna, bhakti yoga. That's a bhakti rasa. And that original bhakti rasa, which is so blissful and eternal, has become adulterated and distorted as sense gratification here. Kama and prema. Prabhupada talks about that in the end of the third chapter, very illuminating. That this kama, this strong desire to enjoy, a sex desire, that is a perverted reflection of prema, because it's been curdled by the contact with the material modes of nature. So the whole task of bhakti yoga is to take that desire, and through the process of chanting and hearing and all of the things that we do, purify it again and again until it shows itself as pure prema. And there's no bad reaction to that. That goes on eternally. That's the ananda buddhivardhana. So we're a long way from that at this point in the Gita. We're understanding what is Brahman and what is the Atma, the self. The self is also Brahman, infinitesimal. And we're not Param Brahman, but individual Brahman. And what is karma? I always thought this definition is so fascinating. That activity which creates your next body. You see? Bhuta bhava bhavakado visarga karma sangika. Action pertaining to the development of the material bodies of the living entities is called karma, or fruitive activities. Now how does that work? Well, when you act fruitively, you have a certain desire in your mind, and you're trying to fulfill it. And maybe you do fulfill it. you know. But of course, then you want to do it again. So that it's implanted in your mind. At the end of your life, you know, how much can you enjoy? It's all misery. But you've got all those desires planted in your mind, how you used to enjoy, you know. And so that stays in the mind. The mind doesn't die. The mind stays with you. Mind, intelligence, ego carries the soul. It's in plain. And so all those unfulfilled desires, plus your karma, good or bad karma, you're judged, you know, which body you'll get. And then you get another body, try to fulfill the desires. So it's going on and on and on. You can see the syndrome. So we want to break that. And the only way to break it is by taking those very senses and the very desires and all the things that cause our bondage and use them in such a way for our liberation. That's the art of bhakti, as explained in the Gaudiya Vaishnava system. So Krishna will describe that, and then we're going to come across this key verse in text 5. I don't know if we'll make it today. All right, any discussion on these points? I always found this chapter very fascinating. Please. Yeah, we need the mic because there's people online, hopefully. At least one. I know the Tapas is there. You just hold it. You just hold it until it turns on.
Okay. So it says in this last verse, when the merit of sacrifice is exhausted, the living entity descends to earth in the form of rain and then takes on the form of grains. Grains are eaten by man, transformed into semen, which impregnates a woman, and thus the living entity once again attains the human form to perform sacrifice again. So I take it that that's not like a metaphor, that's literal.
Yeah.
So I was just trying to think scientifically, like, how does the living entity get into the rain originally?
Yeah.
Is it like they become the prana in the ether, and then that is like brought into the rain, or?
I've never heard of that. You know, this, I haven't really investigated this whole idea of how you fall down. I mean, it's all it mentions is in the 9th chapter. It's mentioned this process. It says, Te tam bhukva swargalogam vishalam. He's describing that those who worship me indirectly, they worship the demigods, and then they go to if they do it right, you know, they may not do it right. If they do it perfectly, then they'll be able to go and to the higher planets. And there, Te tam bhukva swargaloka. Swargaloka is heaven, material heaven. Vishalam. They enjoy godly delights that you can't even conceive of here, you know. But then, Chine Punye Matyalokam Shanti, after many, many years, compared to, you know, thousands, millions, your pious credit runs out. It's all material on a subtle level. And then, Chine Punye Matyalokam Vishanti, that's all Krishna says in the Gita about it. And then you fall down to this world. But this is, the Prabhupada is quoting from, I'm sure, Baladev's commentary, where he brings in from different, you know, Vedas of how it happens. So, I do know, I think was it Adharma, I forget who told me this, that it's hair raising, this fall. What he was saying is that when you're coming down, there's all of these like rakshasas and demons who are eating your body. In other words, you just enjoyed for so many million years, but it has kind of a bad ending to it. And so you're suffering like anything, coming down, and you know, the living entity takes shelter in the drop of rain and comes down, and because you come down from the heaven, then you're due to take birth in the human form, and so you're guided in that way. But this, you know, I don't know the details. I'd have to research it. You know, I'm sure that in other Puranas there's probably a more, you know, detailed and probably hair-raising description of how that happens. But it's something, what Krishna does in the Bhagavad Gita, there's 2 places. Last chapter, he also discouraged us from worshipping the demigods. He says that, Bahunam jamanamante jnanamam bhavadyate vasudeva sarvamiti samaha masadurlabha, that after many, many births of cultivating knowledge, those who are really in knowledge, they surrender unto me. Understanding that Vasudeva, that's Krishna, is everything. You see, but such a Mahatma is very rare, he says. But then, there's others who may cultivate knowledge, but they don't come to that conclusion, because he says it's very rare, which is that Kamais taistai rita jnana papadyante anya devata tang tame veti kondeya tamo kondeya sadata bhava bhavita. that those whose knowledge has been stolen away, again, here comes the karma again, different material desires, they worship the various demigods. They don't want to worship Krishna because Krishna is going to take it all away. He's Hari, that's one way he's Hari. He takes away all your material attachments so that you just surrender to him. So if you're not at that point, no, I want to enjoy, so therefore you won't worship Krishna. Be careful not to worship Hari. Worship Durga, worship Shiva, and then, So if they do it right, that's a big thing in this age. If you do it right, then you can go to the heavenly planets. But then he says, whatever you want to worship, you can develop faith. You want to worship some tree? I'll give you the faith. And then you'll worship, and someday you'll hit the lottery and say, oh, thank you, but it's whatever it is coming from Krishna. I'm giving them the ability to give you. So then he gives his verdict. Andavatu palamtesham tadbhavat alpamedisham devan devayajo yanti madbhakta yanti mamipi. That all of these benefits that the demigod, they have the beginning and an end. We have to really get on a platform of understanding, I'm eternal, therefore my aspirations have to be for eternity. Whatever I'm trying to get that's temporary in this world is just keeping me in this world to suffer more and more. I have to aspire for the eternal good, which is reawakening my love for Krishna. That's our eternal platform. So here he said, those who are Alpamadisham, means small amount of brain substance. They worship the demigods for temporary results. And then he gives a little summary. You worship the demigods, you'll go to the demigods. But they're not in heaven, in Goloka, they're in some heavenly planet. But you worship me, you come to me. And in the 9th chapter, he also discourages, I mentioned that, okay, even if you're able to get to the heavenly planets, after some time, your piety runs out, and you come down here, and this hair-raising story that I heard from some other Purana, how your body's eaten alive, as you come down. Was it worth it? I was up there for so many millions of years. So the thing is, we don't need to get into investigate all the details of how it's going to go. We take Krishna's word, that you go up and then you come down. And therefore, it's a huge detour from your mission of going on the straight path back to Godhead. This is the problem. This world, material world, is a world of diversion. We get diverted from our real mission in life and even forget what it is. And we aspire for this, aspire for that, my time is passing, the body is getting older, aspire for this, then you fall. And if you have no assets in devotional service, chances are really high in this age you're going to lose the human form of life. And you're just postponing. So we should try to stay on the straight and narrow, and even though, for myself, I get back to God in one life, at least we made some progress, and you're assured. I don't know if it's going to be on this world. There's millions of planets, and probably others like this Earth planet. Right now, it looks like there's a huge suicide pact going on. Nobody's stopping the greenhouse gases. We're on the verge of a nuclear war. There's another pandemic brewing. So what are you going to do? Chant Hare Krishna. And realize this is just a way station. Whatever we have, this is, and go on to the next. Hopefully, go back to God, or at least to a planet where we can continue our devotional service. We're not limited to this Earth planet. There's millions of them. That's the best I can do on that, Prabhu. I don't have
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting.
No, it's an interesting question, and I'll try.
But it's literal. It's not a metaphor.
It's not a metaphor.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're at the end of our session, unfortunately. But I have time for one little poem. I just remembered one that I had forgotten. Rishabdev, his teachings are really seminal. 551, if you're interested in 5th canto, 5th chapter, text 1. Prabhupada gave many lectures on this. So I put that, I wrote a verse based on it. It's not exactly literal. So it says, don't waste this precious human life, dear friend, by working hard for hoggish happiness. Through bhakti yoga, worldly life transcend and learn to taste divine love's endless bliss. That's there's a lot of instruction in that. That's Rishabdev. Yes, a few minutes we'll have the darshan. So, okay, let's get ready for darshan. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. So we'll resume on Monday with text 4. Yeah. Okay.